Melech I do every Wednesday. So, Baruch Haba, welcome everyone. Every Wednesday, Baruch Hashem, we learn the Noam Elimelech. However, there's no Noam Elimelech in Sukkos, no Noam Elimelech in V'zayis HaBracha. Not only that, in Parshas Em or Parshas Rebbe, we talk about Sukkos. There's no Noam Elimelech on those Psukim. I didn't look in Pinchas, but I looked, before I looked in Pinchas, I looked in the end of V'yishlach, in the getroffen days. So this is where it says, V'yakov nosa Sukkos of even Lebayis. This is in the book of Genesis, I believe it's chapter 33, if I'm not mistaken, end of chapter 33. It says, and Jacob traveled to a place called Sukkos, the name of the place that he went to. And he built there a house. So it's interesting, right? Because a sukkah is not your house, but it's supposed to be like your house. So he went to a place called Sukkos and he built there a house. You know, this is, when you look at things like this, you know, we realize that the Jewish look at the Torah, at the Bible. Someone who's just reading this might not even recognize. All right, so he went to a place called Sukkos. What difference does that make? Who cares where he went? But we know what Sukkos is, we know what the Yontiv is, we understand. When we see this, we know that this isn't just a coincidence. This isn't just the name of a place. All right, so he went to Middletown and he went to Scranton. No. He went to a place as a name that has a meaning. So the Heilige Elimelech is going to explain like this. Perish. This is the explanation. It's good. On this side it's good. All of his worship, all of his work, all of his service to God was constantly performing unifications, which is of Kabbalistic intentions, mystical meditations, and being connected to God. The Vekas, it means like he's glued onto God. That's how the Heilige Yaakov Avinu Alav Shalom, our holy patriarch Jacob, conducted himself. Where do we learn this? Hanirmus betevas Sukkosa. This idea of Jacob's utter and total connection to God is hinted to by the name of this town, this location that he went to visit, called Sukkos. What does it mean? Hamaramezes ali hayichad kiyadua. Because the word sukkah hints to the unification of God's name. Why? Because God's name, it says it as is known. What it means is it's known. So this is how we explain it. In Hebrew, God's name, particularly the Tetragrammaton, there are many names for God, but the most particular name for God is the Tetragrammaton, which we do not pronounce. And that name, the Y, the H, and the V, and the H, right? Yud K Vav K. The gematria, each number in Hebrew each letter in Hebrew has a numerical number value. So that equals 26. However, most of the time when we see that name, we never pronounce it as it's written, but we usually pronounce it, the name Aleph, Dalet, the Nun, the Yud, Ado, and the Nai, which means the Lord. And that's why you'll see, sometimes we pronounce Elohim, that's if it's next to the name Aleph, Dalet, Nun, and Yud as it's spelled. But generally it's pronounced like Aleph, Dalet, Nun, and Yud. That name, the gematria, is 65. So 65 plus 26 is 91. And 91 is the gematria of Sukkah. Not only it's the gematria of Sukkah, but you have the Samech is the beginning of the Sukkah and the Hey is the end of the Sukkah. So that is 65. In the middle is the Chaf as the Vav and the Chaf is 26. The Chaf is 20, the Vav is 6. Also, you have from Hashem's name the Vav and the Hey. The second letter of the Sukkah is the Vav, and the last letter is the Hey, just like the last letter of Hashem's name is the Hey. So the Sukkah, when we sit in the Sukkah, and we make a bracha, Leishiv Basukah, we're having in mind that we're actually sitting in the name of God. And you're performing unifications and meditations in this form of worship that we engage in through the mitzvah of the Sukkah. And so that's why Jacob went to a place called Sukkos, because that was his whole life was like a Sukkah. Was that type of unification of God's name. However, I was talking to one of my friends. Turn right here usually. Where are you going? You go this way? Oh.
How are you going on the highway over there?
I go through Chester. This is quicker?
Well, here you get right on the 17.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know. Oh, this is where we are. Oh, I see. I never didn't think of that. That's right. This is much quicker. So anyway, the point I'm bringing out is that so this friend of mine, we were talking about that we just lost, the Klal Yisrael just lost Rav Schechter, Zechet Tzaddik Levracha, the Rosh Yeshiva from Chaim Berlin, was just nifter. And then not too much afterwards, the son was just nifter also. Anyway, so who's the Mashgiach in Chaim Berlin. Anyway, I don't remember ever seeing Rav Schechter. Maybe I saw him in the Chasna once or something. I don't remember ever, but this Bacher, a friend of mine, he said, I think he was maybe some Chastar in Chaim Berlin or somewhere, or Purim or somewhere, and he went up to Rosh Yeshiva, Zechron Levracha, and he asked, what should a Yid think about when he's in the street, when he's just living his life? You should think, so the Rosh Yeshiva answered, you should think Einoid Mulvadoi, right? You should think there's nothing else but God. But then he contemplated that for a second. He said, but if you think like that all the time, you could go crazy. So you have to also think about, just your regular life every day. But once in a while, when you have nothing else to think about, then you think that there's nothing else but God, and then that will permeate into the rest of your life. Because if you only think about that, then you won't be able to function. So same thing with Yaakov Avinu, right? So it said, right? Jacob, he had to think about his everyday life, his family, his wives, his children, his property, all of everything he had. However, he didn't invest a tremendous amount of his thoughts into that and make it the main thing that he thought of, but rather just he understood that's what he has to deal with. He has a wife, he has wives, he has kids, he has business, he has to take care of sheep, he has whatever he has to take care of. But he understood in a very superficial and basic way the concepts of this world, and that's why it says "V'zeh vayiven loy bayis." It says, literally it means he built for himself a house, but also vayiven could also be could be translated as he understood for himself a house. Havana, understanding. L'mikneu asa Sukkos. But for his cattle, he made Sukkos. He made tents, tabernacles, huts. Parish, what does it mean? Iker kinyono. So the cattle, the word cattle, here, there's different words in Hebrew for cattle. Here's mikneh. The word mikneh is also related to the word kinyan, meaning acquisition. So we could, instead of translating it, and he built for himself a house, and for his cattle he made tabernacles, tents, booths. You could instead translate it as he understood for himself his house, meaning that he just had the basic level of understanding of how to run his household, but it wasn't the main thing that he invested his time and efforts into. But for his acquisitions, he made Sukkos, meaning that his main acquisition in the world was the concept of Sukkos. What does it mean? Perish Iker Kinyanoi, meaning his main acquisition, meaning his efforts to acquire heaven, the next world. It was only mystical unifications and connections, attachments. V'hovein. We should understand this. So it's interesting. He says v'hovein, which he just explained means havona ba'alma, means just a superficial understanding. But whenever the Rebbe Melech and other tzaddikim at the end of a Torah or the end of a part of a Torah like this is say v'hovein, it doesn't mean havona ba'alma like he just said. That's something you have to understand. This context is king. You can't just say, well, here it says havana and there it says havana, means the same thing. No. When he says here v'hovein, it means you should understand this well. You should understand this with strong intention. So anyway, furthermore, the Rebbe Melech teaches Mishnah in Sukkot. First chapter, Sukkot says, Achoite begodish lasois le'sukkah. What if someone has a hay stalk, a big pile of hay, and he hollows out the middle of the hay stalk, and he makes that a sukkah? Like he makes a cave in the big pile of hay. So that's his sukkah, right? It should be a sukkah. The Mishnah says no, that's not a sukkah. And the Gemara explains because we have an Indian, a klal, a general concept in Jewish law of ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asai, that whenever it says you should make something, it should not be something that's already prefab, pre-made, and you're making it, that it's already made. You know, like you can't take tzitzis that are already tied and sew into a small piece of cloth and sew that onto a beged to make it tzitzis, because it's tasab mishum tasab v'lo min ha'asai. Because when it says gedilam tasab l'cha, you should make tzitzis, you should make fringes. You have to make them. It can't just be pre-made. Same thing as sukkah. A sukkah you have to make. It can't be pre-made.
So it's what we call pre-made?
No. It would be pre-made if you put the schach up first and then put the walls. But making the sukkah is putting on the schach.
Okay.
So therefore, although the truth is, even our deck is already walls, so we don't really have to worry about that. Even if we would make the walls a little bit more and then put the schach, because it's already made. Anyway, but if, let's say, you had a pop-up sukkah that the schach was like built into the roof, and you popped it open, that could be a question of tasab v'lo min ha'asai. You have to put the roof on to make the sukkah, right? So, but what is the deeper Hasidic interpretation of this Mishnah that prohibits one from hollowing out the middle of a hay stalk, or one of those big round hay bales, you know, and it's big enough for a person to fit in, and you hollow it out, especially sitting down, maybe you hollow it out. You're not allowed. Now you could pile up walls and make out of hay and then put schach on top, then be okay. You can't hollow out the middle of a hay bale or a haystack. So why is this? What is the meaning here in the Hasidic homiletical sense? Ki yadua shesukkah hi yichud. It is known that the sukkah represents its spiritual unification, as we mentioned before. So what if a very great tzaddik, very great holy saint, he wants to bring close, to be mekarev, and to attach to himself everything in the world equally. Equality, fraternity, right? In order to make a unification with them. He can't do that. It's impossible. Meaning the tzaddik could think, all right, he's going to accomplish everything vicariously for the whole world. And he can't do that because everyone has their own responsibility to work on themselves. So it cannot only be a vicarious salvation, they have to work it on them themselves. And so each individual can come to that true unification. That's what it means, someone who is hollowing out a haystack, a hay bale, big hay bale, big pile of hay. Lirmois al kol olam hanikra gadish. The whole world is called a haystack. So that's what it's called, a haystack?
Yeah.
Psula mishum tasa. So it's not kosher. It's disqualified. Why? Because a sukkah has to be made and cannot be pre-made. Perish. What does it mean? You have to make the work yourself. You can't have vicarious salvation from someone else. Just relied on a saint and have him save you, or just the saint himself without anybody, in a certain way. I don't know how knowledgeable the Rebbe Melech was about the theology of other religions. I don't think he was probably any kind of apologist, but he probably had some basic knowledge of the other religions, certainly through whatever it says in the Sfarim Kedoshim, that might talk about these things in the sense of some sort of apologetics or whatever. In a certain sense, it represents that you have to do this on your own and not through others for Kala Havan. It's easy to understand. It's interesting, I brought this up today. Someone mentioned to me years ago that in the early Christian church, some of the early church fathers wrote about discouraging particularly Christian women from celebrating the holiday of Sukkos because they didn't celebrate Jewish holidays. Meaning the other two pilgrim holidays in Judaism have a meaning in Christianity, right? Because Pesach is the time of their Easter, and Shavuos is the original Jewish Greek name for Shavuos, not the original name, but the name that Greek-speaking Jews used before Christianity came about was Pentecost, and the Christians have a holiday Pentecost, which is really our holiday Shavuos, just they always celebrate on Sunday, unlike we rabbinical Jews, who we could celebrate Shavuos on different days of the week. And so, in a certain sense, they already had a sense of a Paschal holiday and the Pentecost, but they did not have the Yom Noraim, Tishrei, Sukkos, and it's not part of their tradition. And the early church fathers were discouraging the early Christians from celebrating Sukkos, particularly. Some of them, and there was a little bit of anti-Judaizing in there, and it's interesting that the Elimelech is saying this because essentially Sukkos is a yontiv that represents the opposite, in this sense, a very Hasidic sense, the opposite of the idea of Christianity, because Christianity is a religion of vicarious salvation, and we don't believe in that. We work it out ourselves. We don't have this idea of salvation the way the Christians have, because our idea of original sin is not that everyone's going to hell. It's just that everyone is mortal. It's that even a person who himself has no sin, he could still. And there are several people mentioned in the Gemara that were personally sinless, and yet they died only because Eyota Shel Nachash. That they died because of the advice of the snake, meaning the original sin. And so the Jewish idea of original sin is not that everyone's bad, everyone's going to hell. Doesn't mean everyone's good either. It doesn't even mean that people are essentially good. People are essentially just people, neither good nor bad. But people are mortal, meaning we were created and designed to be immortals, and we fell into mortality because of the original sin. And when that is rectified, that will be removed from us and will be restored to our immortal state. And with that being said, the Yontiv of Sukkos is very connected to eschatology. And so therefore, again, it represents something that is very not Christian, but very Jewish. And it represents a different type of faith than the Christian faith, because Sukkos is a yontiv of faith. Because in the eschatology that's connected to the yontiv of Sukkos, we have the war of Gog and Magog. And the name Gog is related to the word Gog. In English, they just pronounce it Gog. What is a Gog? Gog in Hebrew means a roof. So Sukkos is the opposite of the roof, because a person in the world who is not spiritual. I'm not saying anything against Christianity. I'm just saying in general about secular people in the world. If they're Jewish, they're Christian, they're atheists, they're Hindu, Muslim, whatever they are, if they believe in their roof to protect them, not that there's no faith in God there, one could still be a faithful person and a godly person sitting under a roof, but to put all your faith in the roof, there's a problem. Sukkos represents that archetype that we don't have the roof, we have the schach, which is called the etzela the memnusa. It's the shade, it's the shadow of faith. And so therefore, we trust in God for our protection from the elements. And so that is the concept that we represent in the mitzvah of the sukkah, which is so utterly Jewish that it doesn't fit in with the theology of Christianity. However, Sukkos nonetheless represents our connection to the rest of the world, because and our care and our prayers for the other nations of the world, because on Sukkos we bring Ayin Parei Achag. There's 70 bulls that were offered as sacrifices to atone for all the 70 nations of the world. The Sukkos has a very universal quality to it. And in the eschatological chapters in Zechariah, it says that all the nations of the world will be called up to celebrate Sukkos. And if they don't, they won't receive rain. And the one example that Zechariah gives is that the family of the house of the land of Egypt will not come to Jerusalem to celebrate Sukkos with us, and so their punishment they will not receive any rain. And so therefore, that is also another aspect of the sense of apologetics of the Yontiv of Sukkos, because it represents that archetype of universality. And so that's why we would want to make a choitet begadish. We'd want to connect to the whole world because Sukkot is the time for that. But still, nonetheless, the whole world has to make their effort too. We are extending our olive branch on Sukkot, and they have to make their decision. Are they going to join with us or not? And if they join with us, they receive the rain. And the rain represents not only material blessings, which of course, but also spiritual blessings. That we'll have, the Torah is compared to water. So they receive that blessing of the Torah. And so we're looking forward to that time. And maybe, who knows, it could be happening this year. We all have to do tshuva, and we hope and pray that God will have mercy on us. It's not a guarantee just because you're born Jewish, or even you try your best to be Orthodox, that you're really on the right side. But we got to be focusing on spiritually inside of ourselves, because the tzaddikim revealed to us that Milchemes Gog and Magog is not only a physical war, but it's first and foremost a spiritual war. And the Chavetz Chaim, Sukkos Galenu, explained that the proof that Sukkos is going to be a spiritual war and not a physical war in its main sense is that people feel relieved when they hear it's only going to be a spiritual war and not a physical war.
It's much worse.
And if someone really understands, you should be much more afraid of a spiritual war than a physical war, because the consequences are eternal. And so we hope and pray that God accepted our Yom Kippur. We have faith that God accepted our Yom Kippur. The Vilna Gaon says actually the sins don't count in these 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkos. It means that the kapara and slicha of Yom Kippur extends to these days. So we hope and pray that God has mercy on us. And then when we get to Sukkos, the Lucius Levi explains that Rishon Hu L'Cheshbon Avonos. That's why we threw our averos in the water instead of burned them like the chometz by Tashlech. Why? Because we're sending Tashlech so the sins can be purified and be picked back up. And then we'll do tshuva mi'ahava and stoinos nasos like kazochias. God will turn our sins around to merits like we did mitzvahs. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. We'll see you later. How do I turn this thing off? Which one? This one?